a millionaire, invited her children's nanny to a luxury gala to humiliate her. But when she walked in, the elite guests stood up and started. The boardroom fell silent as twin 6-year-olds burst through the heavy oak doors, their excited voices shattering the corporate calm of Williams & Global Investments. "Mommy, Mommy, look what we got." Jack and Emma Williams waved their certificates in the air, completely oblivious to the 12 stern-faced board members staring at them. Catherine Williams froze mid-presentation, her perfectly manicured hand still pointing at the quarterly projections. This was supposed to be her moment to showcase the company's new social responsibility initiative. Instead, her children had just interrupted the most important meeting of the quarter. "Miss Sarah helped us win first place in the science fair," Emma announced proudly, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she jumped up and down. "She taught us all about ecosystems and helped us build a real terrarium." Catherine's face tightened. There it was again, Sarah this, Sarah that, always Sarah. That's wonderful, darlings," Catherine managed, trying to maintain her composure. "But Mommy's in a very important meeting right now. Where's Miss Sarah?" "Right here, Mrs. Williams. I'm so sorry." Sarah Mitchell appeared at the doorway, slightly out of breath. They were just so excited about their achievement, they ran ahead before I could stop them. Catherine watched as several board members smiled warmly at Sarah. Even old Mr. Chen, known for his perpetual frown, was nodding appreciatively at the young nanny. "The children's timing might be perfect, actually," Margaret Chen, the board's president, spoke up. "We were just discussing the company's commitment to education. Perhaps this is a wonderful example of nurturing young minds." Catherine's jaw clenched. This wasn't how she'd planned to present her initiative. Not with her children's nanny stealing the spotlight. "Yes, well?" Catherine straightened her Chanel jacket. "If we could continue with the formal presentation." But the twins weren't finished. Jack was already pulling out his tablet, eager to show everyone their project. "Look, we even made a video presentation. Miss Sarah taught us how to edit it ourselves." The board members leaned in, genuinely interested, as Jack played the video. Catherine stood frozen, watching her carefully orchestrated meeting derail. Her children's voices filled the room, confidently explaining scientific concepts, their enthusiasm infectious. And there, in the background, was Sarah's gentle guidance, barely visible but unmistakably present. "Remarkable," Mr. Chen commented. "The children seem to have a genuine love for learning." Catherine felt her control slipping away. This was supposed to be her moment to shine, to prove she could balance being a CEO and a mother. Instead, she was watching her children showcase another woman's success with them. Later that afternoon, Catherine walked through the school's hallway for a parent-teacher conference. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the new display case. There, prominently featured, was a project titled My Hero, with Sarah's smiling photo at the center. Her children's handwriting filled the poster. "Miss Sarah is our hero because she always has time for us. She helps us learn new things every day. She makes us feel special and loved." Catherine's hand trembled as she read the words. Each sentence felt like a personal accusation. The nanny she'd hired to make her life easier had somehow become the mother figure she'd tried so hard to be. As she stared at Sarah's photo, something inside Catherine snapped. The upcoming charity gala flashed through her mind, her annual education fundraiser, where Boston's elite gathered to support children's causes. A plan began to form. If Sarah wanted to step into the spotlight so badly, Catherine would give her exactly what she wanted, and teach her a lesson about staying in her place. Little did Catherine know, this decision would set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. Catherine sat in her home office at midnight, illuminated by multiple computer screens. On one monitor, Sarah's social media profiles. On another, her academic records. On the third, a detailed background check report. "Let's see who you really are, Miss Perfect," she muttered, taking another sip of expensive scotch. The more Catherine dug, the more her frustration grew. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a simple nanny. She was a straight-A student at Boston University, working on an innovative early childhood education program. Several wealthy families had already expressed interest in her teaching methods. Catherine's phone buzzed, another email from her ex-husband's lawyer about custody arrangements. She ignored it, just like she ignored the framed photo of the twins that seemed to watch her from her desk. "Mrs. Williams?" Maria, the housekeeper, appeared at the doorway. "I found these in Miss Sarah's bag while cleaning." Catherine snatched the papers from Maria's hands. They were handwritten notes about her children's development, detailed observations, and creative learning strategies. But what caught her eye was a draft proposal for Sarah's university project, a revolutionary approach to combining emotional and academic development in privileged children. "She's using my children as case studies?" Catherine's voice trembled with anger. Memories flooded back. Her own mother's constant criticism, the cold nannies who raised her, her ex-husband telling her she was too focused on work to be a good mother. During their divorce, Catherine opened her laptop and pulled up the guest list for the upcoming charity gala. Boston's elite would all be there. CEOs, philanthropists, old money families, the perfect audience. "Maria, call Valentino. Tell them I need 2 dresses for the gala." Catherine's lips curved into a smile. "One for me and one special order for Sarah." The next morning, Catherine watched from her office window as Sarah arrived, carrying books and craft supplies. The twins ran to greet her with huge hugs. Catherine's hand tightened around her coffee cup. She spent the next hour meticulously planning. The dress for Sarah would be beautiful, but with a subtle defect, one that would become obvious at the worst moment. The seating arrangement would place her next to the most judgmental socialites, and the evening's program would include a special surprise presentation. "Mrs. Williams?" her assistant interrupted. "I found something interesting about Sarah's previous employment." Catherine scanned the document, her eyes widening. 3 years ago, Sarah had worked for another prominent family, but the employment ended abruptly. No reason listed. "Dig deeper," Catherine ordered. "I want everything." She walked to her private bathroom, staring at her reflection. Designer suit, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. The image of success. So why did her children prefer a college student who made minimum wage? "You're doing this for them," she told her reflection. "They need to learn about the real world, about status, about knowing your place." Her phone chimed, confirmation from the gala venue. Everything was set. In 1 week, Sarah Mitchell would learn what happens when you try to rise above your station. Catherine smiled as she imagined the scene. Sarah, out of her depth among Boston's elite, trying to hide her working-class background. The carefully timed revelations, the polite shock on everyone's faces. The social humiliation that would send her running back to whatever small town she came from. "Mrs. Williams?" Her assistant appeared again. "Your ex-husband's lawyer is on line 1 about the custody hearing." Catherine waved her away. She had more important things to focus on. She pulled up the gala's seating chart again, making sure every detail was perfect. Little did she know, her perfect plan was about to reveal far more about herself than she ever intended to expose about Sarah. 5:30 a.m. Catherine's alarm buzzed in her palatial Beacon Hill master suite. Another day of back-to-back meetings. She glanced at her phone, 3 urgent emails from Tokyo already waiting. At the same moment, in a modest apartment across town, Sarah was already awake, reviewing her lesson plans for the twins while sipping coffee from a chipped mug. Her small desk was covered with educational materials and craft supplies for today's activities. 6:45 a.m. Catherine's driver pulled up to Williams & Global Investments in a black Mercedes. She strode through the lobby, heels clicking on marble, nodding curtly at employees who scrambled out of her way. 7 a.m. Sarah parked her used Honda Civic in the Williams driveway. The twins, still in their pajamas, pressed their faces against the window and waved excitedly. "Miss Sarah, we're making pancakes." "Morning, darlings," Sarah called out as she entered the kitchen. "Who wants to learn fractions while we cook?" Me," the twins shouted in unison, while Sarah helped the children measure ingredients. Explaining how 4/4 cups made a whole, Catherine sat in her corner office, preparing for a hostile takeover. "The Thompson deal is falling apart," her CFO reported grimly. "We need to move fast." Catherine barely heard him. She was distracted by a text from Maria. "Miss Sarah teaching kids to cook, making mess in kitchen." Her jaw clenched. "Continue," she told the CFO. Back at the house, Sarah and the twins had moved on to their morning lessons. "Remember," Sarah explained, "learning should be fun. Let's turn this history lesson into a play." The children giggled as they dressed up as colonial settlers, their enthusiasm for learning shining through. Sarah recorded their performance on her tablet, documentation for her university project on innovative teaching methods. At noon, Catherine sat through another tense board meeting. Quarterly projections were down. Shareholders were nervous. Her father's disapproving voice echoed in her head. A woman CEO needs to work twice as hard to prove herself. Her phone buzzed again. Maria had sent a photo, the twins performing their history play, beaming with pride as Sarah applauded. That's when Maria delivered the envelope. "Special courier, Mrs. Williams, about the gala." Catherine opened it to find detailed information about Sarah's previous employment. The mysterious departure from her last position started making sense. A small smile played on her lips. Meanwhile, Sarah was helping the twins with their science homework when the day's mail arrived. Among the bills and flyers was a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering, the annual Boston Children's Education Gala. "What's this?" Sarah wondered aloud, opening the elegant invitation. "You're coming to Mommy's party?" Emma asked excitedly. "We never get to go. It says, 'I'm being honored for contributions to children's education,'" Sarah read in disbelief. Jack peeked at the invitation. "Can we come watch you get your award?" "I don't know, sweetie. This must be a mistake." Sarah stared at the invitation, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. Why would Catherine Williams, who barely spoke to her, suddenly invite her to such a prestigious event? That evening, as Catherine's driver took her home, she received another text from Maria. "Invitation delivered." She looked surprised. "Perfect," Catherine replied, then opened her banking app. The confirmation appeared, $12,000 charged to her account for a designer dress, Sarah's gift for the gala. "Just wait," Catherine whispered to herself. "Just wait until everyone learns who you really are." In her apartment that night, Sarah laid out her textbooks, trying to focus on her studies. But her eyes kept drifting to the invitation on her desk. Other nannies had already texted her warnings. "Be careful, something's not right." She picked up the invitation again, running her fingers over the embossed letters. Little did she know, accepting it would change her life forever. Just not in the way Catherine planned. The Valentino dress arrived 3 days before the gala, wrapped in layers of tissue paper and elegant black boxes. Sarah stared at it in disbelief. She'd never touched anything so expensive in her life. "Try it on," Emma insisted, bouncing on her bed as Sarah carefully lifted the garment. The deep blue silk felt like water running through her fingers. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, checking the price tag before quickly tucking it away. Her entire yearly salary wouldn't cover half of it. Across town, Catherine sat in her office, reviewing the final preparations for the gala with her event coordinator. "The seating arrangements are confirmed," the coordinator reported. "Miss Mitchell will be at table 7, right next to Barbara Whitcomb." Catherine smiled. Barbara Whitcomb, Boston's most notorious gossip columnist, was known for destroying reputations with a single article. "And the presentation?" Catherine asked. "Ready. We'll call her up right after your speech about educational innovation." The day of the gala arrived. Sarah spent her morning with the twins, trying to focus on their lessons, despite her growing anxiety about the evening ahead. "You'll look like a princess," Emma declared, watching Sarah check her makeup for the 3rd time. But when Sarah finally slipped into the dress, her heart sank. Something wasn't right. The seam along the back was barely holding together, ready to split at the slightest movement. No, Sarah muttered, examining the stitching. This was no accident. The seam had been deliberately weakened. Her phone buzzed with texts from other nannies. "Be careful tonight. Catherine Williams never does anything without a reason. Watch your back." Sarah glanced at the clock. 2 hours until the gala. The dress shops would be closed. Her own modest party dress from last Christmas suddenly felt like her only option. Meanwhile, the Grand Plaza Hotel buzzed with last-minute preparations. Catherine inspected every detail personally, from the champagne selection to the lighting angles that would highlight Sarah's inevitable embarrassment. "Mrs. Williams?" Her assistant approached nervously. "There's a situation. Mr. Chen from the Asian Investment Group has arrived early. He's asking about educational initiatives." Catherine froze. James Chen wasn't supposed to arrive until after Sarah's humiliation. His company was considering a billion-dollar investment in American educational programs. Keep him entertained, Catherine ordered. You can't meet Sarah before the presentation. The first guests began arriving at 7. Catherine stood at the entrance, elegant in her red Versace gown, greeting Boston's elite with practiced charm. Her eyes kept darting to the door, waiting for Sarah's arrival. Wonderful event, Catherine, Barbara Whitcomb gushed, air-kissing her cheek. I hear we have some interesting entertainment planned? Just wait, Catherine smiled. You'll have plenty to write about tomorrow. At 7:45, a murmur went through the crowd. Sarah had arrived, but not in the sabotaged Valentino. Instead, she wore a simple but elegant black dress that fit her perfectly. Her hair was styled simply, her makeup subtle but flawless. Who is that? James Chen asked, noticing heads turning. Catherine's champagne glass nearly slipped from her grip. This wasn't part of the plan. Sarah was supposed to arrive uncomfortable, overdressed, out of place. Instead, she looked appropriate, professional, elegant in her simplicity. Just the help, Catherine said quickly, but Chen was already moving toward Sarah, hand extended in greeting. I understand you've developed a new educational methodology, he asked, leaving Catherine standing alone. Sarah's genuine smile and confident handshake made Catherine's blood boil. The evening was already veering off script, but she still had her secret weapon. The presentation that would expose everything. As she watched Sarah charm one guest after another, Catherine failed to notice Margaret Chen, the board president, quietly observing the entire scene from a corner, her expression growing increasingly concerned. The real drama was about to begin, and it wouldn't unfold anything like Catherine had planned. The Grand Plaza's ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and Boston's finest. Catherine made her entrance at exactly 8 p.m., commanding attention in her designer gown. Every head turned, except those still clustered around Sarah at the bar. Your work with children sounds fascinating, James Chen was saying, his investment team taking notes, especially your approach to combining emotional and academic development. Catherine's perfectly painted smile tightened. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to start. She nodded to the event coordinator, who quickly announced dinner seating. Ms. Mitchell, you're at table 7, the coordinator directed, leading Sarah to Barbara Whitcomb's table. Catherine watched with satisfaction as the notorious gossip columnist adjusted her glasses, ready to dissect every faux pas. But Sarah navigated the formal place settings with unexpected ease, making pleasant conversation about the latest education research. Even Barbara seemed genuinely interested. First course. Catherine muttered to herself, signaling the servers. This would surely trip Sarah up, an elaborate 7-course French menu designed to confuse anyone not raised in high society. The soup spoon goes on the outside. Catherine heard Emma's voice in her head, remembering how she'd overheard Sarah teaching the twins table manners through games. Just like the planets orbit the sun, the spoons orbit the plate. To Catherine's frustration, Sarah handled each course perfectly. Worse, her genuine warmth was drawing in the other guests. Stories about the twins' achievements had the entire table engaged. Mrs. Williams, an assistant, appeared at Catherine's elbow. We found something interesting in the donation records. Catherine opened the folder and froze. For the past 3 years, anonymous donations had been made to the education fund, small but consistent amounts that added up to nearly half of Sarah's salary. Impossible, Catherine whispered. She glanced at Sarah, who was now deep in conversation with Patricia Rothschild about early childhood development. It gets better, the assistant continued. She's been volunteering at underprivileged schools on weekends, implementing her teaching methods. Across the room, Margaret Chen watched the scene unfold with growing interest. She'd recognized Sarah immediately, not as the Williams nanny, but as the innovative educator who had helped her grandson overcome learning challenges at one of those weekend programs. Catherine's hand shook slightly as she lifted her wine glass. The presentation was supposed to be her triumph, exposing Sarah as an ambitious social climber using wealthy children for her research. But now, everyone seems quite taken with your nanny, Barbara Whitcomb observed, suddenly appearing at Catherine's side. Such an interesting background she has. Did you know she turned down a full scholarship to Harvard to care for her dying mother? Catherine hadn't known. That detail hadn't been in any background check. Of course, Barbara continued, that's what makes her current research so fascinating, combining privilege with purpose, using her experience with wealthy children to develop programs for underprivileged ones. The room seemed to spin slightly. Catherine's carefully orchestrated humiliation was unraveling. Instead of exposing Sarah as an opportunist, the evening was revealing her as something far more dangerous, genuine. Time for your speech, the event coordinator whispered urgently. Catherine straightened her spine and moved toward the podium. She still had her secret weapon, the mysterious incident from Sarah's previous employment. But as she looked out over the crowd, she caught Margaret Chen's steady gaze. Something in the board president's expression made Catherine's blood run cold. Somehow, she knew this evening was about to reveal far more than she'd planned, and not about Sarah. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the microphone. The real drama was about to begin. Catherine gripped the podium, her knuckles white against the polished wood. Tonight, she began, we're here to discuss innovation in education. The spotlight shifted to the large screen behind her, where her presentation was ready to launch. One click would reveal what she'd discovered about Sarah's past, or so she thought. Before we continue, Margaret Chen's voice cut through the silence. I believe we should hear about an exceptional program already making waves in our community. Catherine's finger froze above the remote. This wasn't part of the schedule. Sarah Mitchell, Margaret continued, standing, would you share with us your remarkable work, combining privileged and underprivileged educational environments? The spotlight swung to Sarah, who rose gracefully. Catherine watched in growing horror as her carefully planned exposure transformed into something else entirely. 3 years ago, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. I started noticing something while working with the Williams children. Privileged kids often have access to the best educational tools, but sometimes lack the real-world connections that make learning meaningful. The crowd leaned in, genuinely interested. Even Barbara Whitcomb had put down her phone to listen. So I developed a program, Sarah continued, where privileged children become peer mentors to underprivileged ones. They learn from each other. The wealthy kids develop empathy and leadership skills, while the underprivileged ones gain access to resources and confidence. Catherine's mouth went dry as James Chen nodded enthusiastically. This was exactly the kind of innovative approach his company was looking to fund. The results have been remarkable, Margaret added. My own grandson participated in the pilot program. His grades improved dramatically, but more importantly, his emotional intelligence grew. Catherine's finger twitched on the remote. One click would still show everyone the damning evidence she discovered about Sarah's sudden departure from her previous position. But as she pressed the button, nothing happened. Technical difficulties? Margaret asked innocently, holding up a USB drive. Or perhaps you're looking for this? The one containing the altered documents about Sarah's previous employment. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. The truth is, Margaret continued, Sarah's departure from the Andersons was due to their relocation to London. They actually offered to take her with them, but she chose to stay in Boston to develop her education program. Memories suddenly flooded Catherine's mind. Her own childhood, the cold nannies, her mother's constant criticism, the way she'd felt when her ex-husband took the twins for his court-mandated weekends. You're trying to take them from me, Catherine burst out, her composure finally cracking. Just like everyone else. The ballroom fell silent. Sarah stepped forward, her expression compassionate rather than triumphant. Mrs. Williams, she said softly, I've never wanted to replace you. I've been trying to help you connect with your children in the limited time you have with them. Lies. Catherine's voice shook. I've seen the videos, the pictures, the way they look at you. Perhaps, James Chen interjected, we should all see those videos. The ones of your children learning and growing? Before Catherine could object, the screen behind her came to life. But instead of the damaging presentation she'd planned, it showed a montage of carefully documented moments. The twins learning to read, performing science experiments, playing educational games. And there in the background of many shots was Catherine herself, always working, always distant, but present. Sarah had been quietly documenting not just the children's progress, but their mother's presence, however peripheral. "You see, Mrs. Williams," Sarah explained gently, "my research isn't just about teaching children. It's about helping busy parents stay connected to their kids' development, even when they can't be there every moment." Catherine stared at the screen, seeing her family through new eyes. The truth she'd been trying to expose had backfired, revealing instead the painful reality she'd been hiding from herself. Margaret Chen stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Catherine's arm. "I think," she said quietly, "we all need to have a very different kind of conversation." The tension in the Grand Plaza ballroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Catherine stood frozen at the podium, her perfect facade cracking as hundreds of Boston's elite watched her carefully constructed plan collapse. "Perhaps," Margaret Chen suggested, her voice carrying across the silent room, "Miss Mitchell should share more about her vision for the future of education." Sarah rose slowly, smoothing her simple black dress. As she walked to the podium, Catherine remained rooted in place, unable to step aside. "Mrs. Williams," Sarah said softly, "would you like to present this together?" The question caught Catherine off guard. Even now, after everything, Sarah was offering her a chance to save face. Before Catherine could respond, the ballroom doors burst open. Jack and Emma Williams ran in, still in their pajamas, followed by a flustered-looking Maria. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Williams," Maria gasped. "They insisted on seeing Miss Sarah's special moment." "Mommy," Emma called out, "we made something for your party." The twins carried a large poster board between them, covered in photos and childish handwriting. Catherine recognized it as their My Hero project, but something was different. "Look," Jack announced proudly, holding up the project. "We added more." The photos now showed not just Sarah, but Catherine too. Next to pictures of science experiments with Sarah were snapshots of rare moments with their mother. Catherine reading bedtime stories during business calls, attending school events between meetings, trying to bake cookies on a Sunday afternoon. "We have two heroes," Emma declared. "Miss Sarah teaches us every day, but Mommy works super hard to give us everything we need." Catherine's hands trembled as she stared at the project. All this time she'd been so focused on competing with Sarah that she'd missed what her children were actually trying to tell her. Sarah stepped to the microphone. "This," she said, gesturing to the twins' project, "is what real education looks like. It's not just about academic achievement or social status. It's about building connections, understanding each other, and recognizing that we all have something valuable to contribute." The crowd watched, captivated as Sarah continued. "When I started working with the Williams family, I saw two incredibly bright children with a mother who loved them fiercely, but didn't know how to balance that love with her other responsibilities. So I didn't just create a teaching program, I created a bridge." Catherine felt tears threatening to spill from her carefully made-up eyes. The twins had moved to stand between her and Sarah, holding both their hands. "My research isn't about replacing parents," Sarah explained. "It's about supporting them. About helping busy professionals stay connected to their children's development. About turning every moment, even small ones, into opportunities for growth and connection." The room erupted in applause. James Chen was nodding vigorously, already making notes. Barbara Whitcomb was actually wiping away a tear. "Mommy," Jack tugged at Catherine's dress. "Are you crying because you're happy or sad?" Catherine looked down at her son, then at her daughter, then at the young woman who hadn't tried to steal her children after all, who had instead been trying to help her keep them. "I'm crying," Catherine started, her voice shaking, "because..." But before she could finish, Margaret Chen stepped up to the microphone, her expression grave. "Before we continue this touching moment," she announced, "there's something else everyone needs to know." The room fell silent once again. Catherine felt her heart stop as Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out a folder marked, "Confidential, board eyes only." Margaret Chen opened the folder with deliberate slowness, the rustle of papers echoing in the silent ballroom. Catherine's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she waited for the final blow. "These," Margaret held up a stack of emails, "are communications between Mrs. Williams and various parties, planning tonight's events. They detail an elaborate scheme to publicly humiliate Sarah Mitchell." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The twins looked up at their mother, confusion clouding their young faces. A sabotaged designer dress, strategic seating arrangements, forged documents about her previous employment, even hired photographers positioned to capture her supposed downfall. Margaret's voice was steady but disappointed. All orchestrated by someone who claims to care about children's education. Catherine felt the room spinning. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "Mommy?" Emma's small voice cut through the chaos. "Did you try to hurt Miss Sarah?" The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. How could she explain this to her children? How could she justify trying to destroy someone they loved? Catherine started, but words failed her. "There's more," Margaret continued. "The board has been investigating Mrs. Williams' handling of the company's educational initiatives. We've discovered that funds meant for underprivileged schools were being redirected to inflate our public image." James Chen stood up, his investment team already packing their briefcases. "I believe we've seen enough," he said coldly. "Wait." Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong. "Before everyone judges too harshly, there's something else you need to see." She pulled out her tablet and connected it to the presentation screen. Images filled the display. Dozens of moments showing Catherine's attempts to be present in her children's lives despite her overwhelming responsibilities. Mrs. Williams isn't just a CEO or a mother trying to maintain control, Sarah explained. She's someone who's been carrying the weight of impossible expectations her entire life. The screen showed Catherine taking business calls while attending school plays, reviewing contracts during soccer games, trying desperately to be everywhere at once. "The real failure," Sarah continued, "isn't in Mrs. Williams' actions tonight. It's in a system that forces parents, especially mothers, to choose between professional success and personal connection." The room fell silent again, but differently this time. Several female executives in the audience nodded in understanding. "Perhaps," Margaret said thoughtfully, "this situation calls for innovation of a different kind." Catherine looked up sharply. Was this a lifeline or the final nail in her coffin? "The board proposes a new direction for our educational initiatives," Margaret announced. "One that addresses both privilege and pressure. Mrs. Williams will step down as CEO temporarily to help develop this program, with Sarah Mitchell's guidance." Catherine felt her knees weaken. Step down? Even temporarily, this was a public admission of defeat, but then she felt two small hands slip into hers. Her children were looking up at her not with disappointment, but with hope. "Does this mean you'll be home more, Mommy?" Jack asked. Before Catherine could answer, her father's voice cut through the crowd. "Catherine, a word. Now." Richard Williams, founder of the company and Catherine's greatest critic, stood at the ballroom entrance, his expression unreadable. The room seemed to hold its breath. Catherine looked from her father to her children, from Sarah to Margaret, feeling the weight of every decision she'd ever made bearing down on this moment. Her father's voice had always meant judgment, criticism, the constant pressure to be perfect. But for the first time in her life, Catherine wasn't sure she cared what he had to say. She squeezed her children's hands, straightened her spine, and made a decision that would change everything. The morning after the gala, Catherine's face was splashed across every business news website in Boston. "Williams and Global CEO steps down amid education fund scandal," read the headlines. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, her assistant reminded her nervously. Catherine stared at her reflection in her office window. For the first time in her career, she wasn't sure if she should take her usual seat at the head of the table. The investigation team had arrived early, filling the conference room with boxes of documents. 3 years of educational initiative records were being combed through with fine-toothed precision. Mrs. Williams, a junior investigator, approached her. "We need to discuss some irregularities in the foundation's accounts." Before she could respond, Margaret Chen entered the room. "That won't be necessary right now. The board has a different priority this morning." Catherine watched as Sarah Mitchell was escorted in, carrying her own stack of documents. The young woman who was supposed to have been humiliated at the gala now sat confidently across from corporate lawyers and board members. Miss Mitchell's educational program, Margaret began, has attracted significant attention. Mr. Chen's investment group has expressed serious interest, but with one condition. Catherine's throat tightened. She knew what was coming. They want the program implemented independently from Williams & Global, Margaret continued. Given recent events, they believe a fresh start is necessary. The words hit Catherine like physical blows. Not only was she losing her position, but she was about to watch Sarah walk away with a multi-million-dollar opportunity. However, Sarah spoke up, surprising everyone. I have a counter-proposal. She opened her laptop, displaying a presentation titled, Bridge the Gap, Integrating Privilege and Purpose in Education. The problems we uncovered aren't unique to the Williams family, Sarah explained. Across corporate America, parents struggle to balance success and presence. What if we turned this crisis into an opportunity? The room fell silent as Sarah outlined her vision, a revolutionary program combining corporate leadership with educational innovation, using Williams & Global as a pilot case. The real scandal, Sarah continued, looking directly at Catherine, isn't that a successful woman struggled to balance her roles. It's that we've built a system where she had to choose between them. Catherine felt tears threatening again, but for a different reason this morning. Every word hit home. Mrs. Williams's temporary step down shouldn't be a punishment, Sarah argued. It should be a chance to help create real change. Suddenly, Catherine's phone lit up with an unexpected message. A competing investment firm was offering to fund the entire program under her leadership. Her finger hovered over the message. This was her chance to take everything Sarah had built and make it her own. To prove she could still win. But as she looked around the room, she saw something she'd never noticed before. The female board members who juggled families with careers, the young executives who stayed late every night, the working parents trying to do it all. I have a suggestion, Catherine said, finding her voice. But it requires everyone in this room to admit something we've been denying for years. The board members leaned forward, curious. The true cost of success isn't measured in dollars, Catherine continued. It's measured in moments missed, in relationships strained, in children who learn to compete before they learn to connect. She stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I accept the temporary step down, she announced. But not to just fix our educational initiatives, to fix the culture that made them necessary. The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret Chen smiled slightly, nodding in approval. But before anyone could respond, Catherine's assistant burst in, face pale with urgency. Mrs. Williams, he gasped, your father is here with the family lawyers, and he's demanding immediate control of the company. I can't believe I'm doing this, Catherine muttered, sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Andrea Thompson, one of Boston's most respected family therapists. The leather couch felt foreign, unlike the familiar executive chairs she was used to. 2 weeks had passed since the gala. 2 weeks since her father had stormed into the boardroom demanding control. 2 weeks of headlines, investigations, and sleepless nights. Mrs. Williams, the therapist called, opening her office door. Catherine entered, immediately noticing the lack of pretense in the simple room. No awards on the walls, no expensive art, just comfortable chairs and a calming view of the Boston Common. So, Dr. Thompson began, tell me about your mother. Across town, Sarah sat in a very different meeting. The Williams & Global conference room had been transformed into a workshop space with educational materials and development plans covering every surface. The pilot program launches in 3 schools next month, Sarah explained to the investment team. We're focusing on integrating working parents' expertise into the curriculum. James Chen nodded approvingly. And Mrs. Williams' involvement? Sarah pulled up a presentation slide showing Catherine reading to a group of children, her own twins among them, while other corporate parents watched and learned. She's our bridge between the corporate and educational worlds, Sarah explained. Her experience makes the program relatable to other executives. Back in the therapist's office, Catherine was finally voicing truths she'd buried for decades. She never thought I was good enough, Catherine said, tears flowing freely now. Every achievement was met with, you could have done better. Even when I made CEO, she just asked when I was planning to have children. And now you're worried you've passed that same pressure onto your own children? Dr. Thompson asked gently. Catherine nodded, remembering the twins' faces at the gala. At the Williams mansion, those same children were experiencing their own transformation. For the first time, their after-school routine included dedicated time with their mother. Now, just like Miss Sarah taught us, Catherine said, sitting cross-legged on the playroom floor, let's turn this math homework into a game. Emma giggled as they used M&Ms to learn fractions, while Jack built multiplication tables with Legos. Catherine's phone buzzed constantly, but it remained face down, ignored. Mrs. Williams? Maria appeared at the door. The board meeting starts in an hour. Catherine checked her watch, surprised to find she'd spent 2 hours fully present with her children. It felt different. Better. The changes weren't just personal. Williams & Global was undergoing its own transformation. Sarah's educational program had become the company's flagship initiative, with a twist no one had expected. We're not just teaching children, Sarah presented to a room full of corporate leaders. We're teaching companies how to support working parents, how to measure success not just in profits, but in balanced lives. Catherine sat in the audience, watching Sarah command the room. There was no jealousy now, only a growing respect and understanding. Next week, Sarah continued, Mrs. Williams will share her story at the National Corporate Leadership Summit, not as a cautionary tale, but as a catalyst for change. The presentation screen showed statistics that couldn't be ignored. Improved productivity among parents in the program, decreased turnover, better employee satisfaction scores. This isn't just about education, Catherine found herself adding, standing up unexpectedly. It's about breaking cycles, about admitting that success shouldn't require sacrifice of self or family. The room fell silent, corporate leaders recognizing their own struggles in her words. Later that evening, Catherine sat in her home office, reviewing her therapy notes alongside quarterly reports. A small frame on her desk caught her eye, a new addition. It showed her and Sarah at last week's program launch, both smiling genuinely as the twins photobombed the picture. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Tomorrow's parent integration workshop still okay? The other CEOs are actually showing up. Catherine smiled, about to reply, when another message appeared. This one from her father. We need to talk. It read, about the future of the company and about your mother. She stared at the message, feeling the old anxiety rising. But before it could take hold, she heard laughter from the playroom. Her children's happy voices mixing with Sarah's as they prepared for tomorrow's workshop. Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and made another decision that would change everything. The old Catherine would have immediately rushed to meet her father's demands. But she wasn't that person anymore. She picked up her phone and began typing a response that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. The Williams family estate loomed before Catherine, its imposing gates as intimidating as they'd been in her childhood. She'd chosen this location for the confrontation deliberately, the place where all her insecurities began. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah said from the passenger seat. They developed an unexpected alliance over the past weeks. Yes, I do, Catherine replied, then smiled slightly, but thank you for being my backup. Inside, Richard Williams sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of old money and power. Catherine's mother, Elizabeth, perched stiffly on an antique chair beside him. You're destroying everything we built, Richard began as Catherine entered. This educational program is turning our company into a charity case. Actually, Catherine said, placing a folder on his desk, it's turning our company into a leader in corporate innovation. She opened the folder, revealing the latest financial projections. 3 major companies had already licensed their program. Employee retention was up 40%. The stock had stabilized after the initial scandal. Numbers don't lie, Dad. Isn't that what you always taught me? Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. Catherine, dear, we're just worried about your emotional state. First the divorce, now this public breakdown. Breakdown? Catherine laughed. But there was no bitterness now. Mom, I'm finally breaking through. She pulled out her phone, showing them a video from that morning's parent integration workshop. CEOs and senior executives sat on colorful cushions, learning to connect with their children through educational play. Their genuine laughter filled the study. This is what success looks like, Catherine explained. Not just profit margins, but people actually living while they earn. It's unseemly, Elizabeth sniffed. A Williams working with a nanny. That nanny has revolutionized corporate family dynamics, Catherine countered. But this isn't about Sarah, it's about us, about the legacy of pressure and perfectionism that almost cost me my children. Richard stood abruptly. Everything we did was to make you strong. No, Catherine's voice was steady. Everything you did was about control. Just like everything I did with Sarah was about control, but I'm breaking that cycle. She pulled out one final document, her mother's medical records from 30 years ago. I found these during the company audit, Catherine said softly. Your hospitalization for exhaustion when I was 12. It wasn't exhaustion, was it, Mom? Elizabeth's face went pale. Richard gripped his desk. You had a breakdown trying to be the perfect corporate wife, Catherine continued. Just like I almost had one trying to be the perfect corporate mother. When will it end? Tears rolled down Elizabeth's cheeks. We never meant. I know, Catherine crossed the room taking her mother's hand. You were doing what you thought was right, just like I was, but we can do better. Outside the study, Sarah waited with Jack and Emma. The children's laughter echoed through the austere hallways, changing their atmosphere. Your grandparents need to see something, Catherine called out. The twins bounded in, carrying their latest school projects, collaborative works they'd done with both privileged and underprivileged classmates. Look, Grandpa, Jack exclaimed. I helped Tommy learn division, and he taught me about urban gardens. Emma chimed in. And Mommy came to our presentation. She didn't even look at her phone once. Richard Williams stared at his grandchildren, seeing something he'd missed in his own daughter, the joy of unfiltered achievement. Catherine, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, your mother and I, we should have. I know, Dad, Catherine replied, but it's not too late, for any of us. Sarah appeared at the doorway, carrying more workshop materials. Elizabeth tensed, but Catherine squeezed her hand. Mom, Dad, let me show you what real success looks like, Catherine said. Not in spreadsheets or stock prices, but in moments like this. She nodded to Sarah, who set up a presentation that would change not just the Williams family, but the entire concept of corporate legacy. As the presentation began, Catherine looked around the room, at her father's softening expression, her mother's dawning understanding, her children's natural enthusiasm, and Sarah's quiet support. The old Williams estate, once a symbol of rigid expectations, was transforming into something new, just as she had. But before the transformation could complete, Richard Williams made one final announcement that would test everything Catherine had learned about control, success, and what really matters in life. Before we continue, he said gravely, there's something you need to know about the company's original founding. The room fell silent, waiting for one last truth to emerge. Richard Williams' words hung in the air of the study like a physical presence. The company wasn't actually founded by me, he said quietly. It was your mother's inheritance. Catherine stared at her parents, the revelation hitting her like a tidal wave. Elizabeth Williams straightened in her chair, decades of carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I was 22, Elizabeth began, her voice trembling. My father left me his educational publishing company, but in 1975, no one would take a young woman CEO seriously. So she looked at her husband, I put it in Richard's name when we married. The silence in the study was deafening. Catherine's mind raced through years of memories, her mother's rigid expectations, her father's demanding presence, the constant pressure to prove herself in a company that had actually been her maternal inheritance all along. Mom? Catherine whispered, understanding flooding through her. All those years of pushing me to be perfect. I thought I was protecting you, Elizabeth said, tears flowing freely now. I didn't want you to make my mistakes, to give away your power. But instead, I just taught you to fear losing it. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Mrs. Williams, Elizabeth, your company's original mission was education, wasn't it? Elizabeth nodded, pulling an old photograph from her desk drawer. It showed a much younger version of herself standing in front of a small publishing house specializing in educational materials. Williams Educational Press, she said softly, before it became Williams and Global Investments. Then this, Catherine realized, looking between Sarah and her mother. "This isn't just about fixing my mistakes. It's about restoring the company's original purpose." The next hour passed in a blur of emotions and revelations. Elizabeth shared stories of her father's vision for accessible education. Richard, for the first time, spoke about his own insecurities leading a company that wasn't truly his. The twins listened, wide-eyed, as their family history unfolded in a new light. 6 months later, the grand auditorium of the newly renamed Williams Educational Innovation Center was packed. Corporate leaders, educators, and media filled every seat, waiting for the announcement that had been making headlines for weeks. Catherine stood backstage, adjusting her jacket, not a power suit this time, but a comfortable blazer over a casual top. Sarah stood beside her, reviewing their presentation one last time. "Ready?" Sarah asked. Catherine looked out at the audience. She spotted her mother sitting in the front row, looking relaxed for the first time in decades. Richard sat beside her, holding her hand openly. The twins were bouncing in their seats, wearing t-shirts with the new company logo. "Ready?" Catherine answered, meaning it. They walked onto the stage together, CEO and educator, former adversaries turned partners. The presentation screen behind them displayed their new corporate motto, building bridges between success and connection. 6 months ago, Catherine began, I stood at a different podium, planning to destroy someone I saw as a threat. Today, I stand here to announce the largest corporate educational initiative in our company's history. The screen filled with images of their pilot program's success, corporate parents engaged with their children's education, underprivileged schools receiving resources and support, working mothers finding balance without sacrifice. Williams Educational Innovation Center isn't just about teaching children, Sarah continued. It's about transforming corporate culture, about proving that success doesn't have to cost us our humanity. The presentation outlined their expanded program. Corporate-sponsored educational centers in underprivileged areas, parent integration workshops now licensed to 50 major companies, and a revolutionary approach to measuring corporate success through both profit and family wellness metrics. But our biggest announcement, Catherine said, smiling at her mother, is the establishment of the Elizabeth Williams Foundation for Women in Leadership. Elizabeth gasped audibly as Catherine explained the foundation's mission, supporting women leaders in maintaining both their power and their connections, breaking the cycles of sacrifice that had haunted generations. The presentation continued with statistical proof of their success. Employee retention up 60%, productivity increased by 40%, and an unprecedented rise in working parent satisfaction across participating companies. The stock price had not only recovered but soared. We're not just changing companies, Sarah explained. We're changing lives. The screens showed testimonials from corporate parents who'd reconnected with their children, from underprivileged students thriving in their new programs, from working mothers finally finding balance. As the presentation concluded, Catherine felt a tug at her sleeve. The twins had sneaked backstage, unable to contain their excitement any longer. "Can we tell them about the new schools, Mommy?" Emma whispered loudly. Catherine looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. This was the new normal, embracing imperfect moments, letting life and work blend naturally instead of fighting for rigid control. "Come on up," Catherine said into the microphone, watching her parents beam with pride as the twins bounded onto stage. Jack grabbed the microphone. "We're opening 3 new schools," he announced, "and Mommy and Miss Sarah are both our teachers now." The audience laughed warmly. Catherine saw James Chen nodding approvingly. Their success had attracted international attention, with requests to implement the program globally. "The future of success," Catherine concluded, wrapping her arms around her children, "isn't about choosing between achievement and connection. It's about building bridges between them." The applause was thunderous, but Catherine barely heard it. She was watching her mother walk towards the stage, tears streaming down her face, arms open wide. "I'm so proud of you," Elizabeth whispered as she hugged her daughter. "Not because you're successful, but because you're whole." As the family embraced on stage, 3 generations of Williams women finally at peace with themselves, Sarah watched from the side, smiling at the transformation she'd helped catalyze. The evening concluded with an unexpected announcement. Catherine and Sarah's co-authored book, Breaking the Legacy of Loss, was already a pre-order bestseller. Their story of transformation from enemies to allies had captured the nation's imagination. Later that night, as Catherine tucked her children into bed, no phone in sight, no meetings pending, she remembered the gala that had started it all. How fear of losing control had almost cost her everything. How admitting vulnerability had actually given her more power than she'd ever had. "Mommy," Emma asked sleepily, "are you happy now?" Catherine looked at her daughter, then at the family photo on the nightstand. It showed all of them. Catherine, the twins, her parents, and Sarah, at the program's first graduation ceremony, all wearing genuine smiles. "Yes, sweetheart," she answered truthfully. "I'm finally happy." In her own apartment, Sarah finished grading papers from their newest educational center. Her phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Tomorrow's board meeting, casual dress code. Dad insists we do it in the new playground space." Sarah smiled, remembering how it all began with a gala invitation meant to humiliate her. Sometimes she realized the worst intentions could lead to the best outcomes. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Catherine's place? Remember to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about transformation, success, and the real meaning of wealth. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because sometimes the most beautiful changes in life start with stories like these. Remember, true success isn't measured by the power we hold, but by the bridges we build. See you in our next story.